Hello and welcome back to Jo's Art History Bite-Size, small, manageable podcast episodes which sees me, Jo McLaughlin, your host and resident art historian, deep dive into a specific artwork or artist in 10 minutes or less. This week, continuing our Scottish theme, we look at Ian Hamilton Finley and his masterpiece, Little Sparta. Let's get started. Ian Hamilton Finley was born in Nassau, which is the capital city in the Bahamas. It's previously known as Georgetown, and he was born in 1925. He was brought up, however, in Glasgow and the Orkney Isles. He practised as a painter and writer during the 1940s and 50s, with little to minimum success, but it was in the 1960s Hamilton Finley emerged as one of the leaders of concrete poetry and over a period of 40 years became one of Scotland's most distinguished artists. He is multi-talented. He is a poet, a philosopher and a gardener, as we're about to find out. He is best known for the work that we're going to talk about today, called Little Sparta. It's a classical garden that he built in midst of a bleak Scottish moor. A fusion of so many of his artistic ideas and particularly of his concern of man's relationship to nature. With the assistance of multiple collaborators, Finley translated his proposal into a myriad of different objects, from sculptures in stone and glass and neon to postcards, prints and booklets. They're united in their place in Finley's wonderful garden known as Little Sparta. Now, Finley himself, along with his wife, spent almost 40 years living and working in Little Sparta, almost never leaving due to the artist's severe agoraphobia. When he arrived with his wife in 1966, the garden was non-existent. And actually, what they arrived to was a series of run-down farm buildings, which Ian and his wife instantly set about rectifying and transformed this rather derelict farm into what it is now. Now, originally, the farm was called Stony Path, which was the name that the farm had previously held, but the name change happened in the 1980s, and there's a good story behind that, but I'll explain that a little later on. The garden itself is filled with over 270 works of art, set out to what Finley has described as a specific landscape. And there are several areas in the garden that have their own character and mood, and the artworks very much help set the tone. Now, as you can imagine, 270 works in the garden. I am not going to go through them all. However, I'm more going to introduce you today to the ideas of Little Sparta and what Ian Hamilton Finley was trying to achieve. And in order to create the garden, he worked with lots of different collaborators. This was stone carvers, letterers, at times other artists and poets. And all the artworks that were created are integral to the garden and how you explore through the space. And the garden is still open today, despite Ian Hamilton Finley no longer being with us, having passed away in 2006. The garden is open at certain times of the year for visitors to come and explore and celebrate Ian's vision. And actually, it was something for Ian that he wanted people to come to the garden and experience art and celebrate the beauty of art and his philosophy and thinking. And as I said, the garden has lots of different areas, lots of different themes, and these are wide ranging from the ideas of the sea to our relationship with nature, classical antiquity, the French Revolution, and the Second World War. Now, you might remember me here saying that Finley was at the forefront of concrete poetry. He was a concrete poet. So what does that mean? Essentially, he used poetry and sort of took it down to its very, very bare minimum. And you can find these poems all over the garden, individual poems or sculptural poems in stone, wood and metal. Now, the garden itself is a wonderful site and a place I feel it's best to be introduced by an expert, and that is George Gilland, who has been the head gardener at Little Sparta since 2012. Now, what I'm about to play to you is an extract taken from the website, and the website itself is extremely interactive. I'm assuming this happened because of COVID, but you can actually do an audio tour of the garden, and there's lots of different sites where you can explore the artworks by clicking on them, and there's an audio tour as well as video and drone footage of the garden. So you do get a sense of what Ian Hamilton Finley was trying to create, and it's a really unusual oasis within this moorland in Scotland. So without further ado, here is your introduction to the garden from George.
Welcome to Little Sparta. The first thing I would say about this place as a garden is that it's not so much an arrangement of plants as it is a placement of ideas. So it's worth bearing that in mind as you walk around. Ian Hamilton Finley, first and foremost, thought of himself as a poet, a concrete poet, which is to do with the shape of language or the appearance of words on the page. So this is very much a garden of language, which has to be read, which makes it a very different approach to how you encounter and understand the space. There are several main themes which dominate the artworks which appear in the garden. The first of them is that this is a garden of the sea. We're as physically far from the sea as you can get in any direction, but it's to do with a romantic notion of the sea or an idea of the sea. So in many places you will see references to boats or boat names. And one of the main sound effects that you'll encounter in the space is the sound of the wind through the tree canopy overhead echoes the sound of waves, or the movement of light and shadow over the grasses imitates the movement of the water. The next main thing would be that this is a classical garden after the ideas of ancient Greece and Rome, which also in part explains the name of the garden, Little Sparta, which comes from the idea of Edinburgh being thought of as the Athens of the North, as a center of learning during the Enlightenment. And Sparta was a city-state which was always in opposition to Athens. So Little Sparta is a cultural outpost in opposition to the cultural hierarchy of Edinburgh. Finley was very antagonistic towards other cultural organizations. The next main thing would be the French Revolution. This isn't as random as it at first sounds. Finley was looking for a good revolution, and it happened to tie up nicely with his political ideas and also his ideas and representations of nature. But there is an overlap here with the classical world as well, because the French Revolution adopted the ideas of neoclassicism in much of their architecture. So these different themes start to play with one another and inform one another. And then the final main theme would be the Second World War, I guess, as the major historical event in Finley's lifetime, but also because he was fascinated by the aesthetics of war, which is quite an interesting concept. For him, the outline of a battleship can be as intricate and beautiful as the Corinthian capital on top of a column. So these are the main themes that you will encounter in the garden. They appear in individual pieces, and the themes can overlap and inform one another.
And there you have it. I think this is such a wonderful thing to offer visitors, both to the garden and people that are physically far away who are fans of Ian's work. I feel George, who has worked there for over a decade now, has a real sense of love and pride and passion and an understanding of Ian and his partner's vision for the space. So I do hope that you've enjoyed that, and please do follow the link in the show notes below to Little Sparta's website. And goes without saying that the garden itself, although I have never visited, it's something that we discussed quite a lot, having studied art history in Scotland and obviously being Scottish myself. Ian Hamilton Finley is is a name that's thrown around quite a lot up there, and I've actually never been to the garden, so it goes without saying that this is on my must visit list for 2024 when I find myself back up north during the summer months for a few weeks, as I normally always do. Now, you may remember hearing from George's description that Ian Hamilton Finley was described as a bit of an antagonist when it came to other cultural institutions. And this was actually due to a long-running dispute with the local council that Ian and his partner had when they were establishing and building their garden, that he didn't think was very much a garden. He saw it as a temple to art. And essentially, he built buildings which acted as galleries to show his work. But the works, to the best of my understanding, were never for sale. However, the council saw this differently and essentially tried to brand Little Sparta as a bit of an art gallery. And in doing so, there's a bit of disagreement that happens. So I'm going to play you a great clip actually from Richard Ingleby and Andrew Dixon, who I'll leave a link to this video in the show notes below as well. It's a 6-minute video tour of the garden where Richard Ingleby, who actually runs Ingleby Gallery, he's the co-founder of a great gallery in Edinburgh called Ingleby, and Andrew for The Guardian is there to sort of have a look around and discuss with Richard why Little Sparta is so interesting. And they gave a really great explanation as to what happened with the local council and why.
He used these buildings as a kind of a gallery space, but they were an extension of the garden. He put works in there that had a direct narrative relationship with what was going on in the garden. This is the garden temple, the temple to Apollo. And if you read the inscription on it, gilded to Apollo, his music, his missiles, his muses, god of culture, god of music, but also conflict.
War is everywhere you look at Little Sparta, not just because Ian Hamilton Finley was obsessed by Greek and Roman culture. The place took its name because of a long-running dispute with the local council. The council wanted to classify it as a gallery and increase its tax rate accordingly, but Finley insisted it was a temple to art. Calling the gardens Little Sparta was a joke, but not entirely.
He looked for support, as you would, to the artistic establishment, headquartered in Edinburgh, Scottish Arts Council, National Galleries. He didn't get support. As you know, Edinburgh, famously the Athens of the North. He was living in a kingdom that was at conflict with that. So he became Sparta, Little Sparta.
So there you have it. He sought help from the cultural institutions in Edinburgh to essentially help defend his cause, that what he was trying to do wasn't in fact a gallery. It was a place where people could come and celebrate art, a temple to art. And his pleas to his cultural institutions in Edinburgh fell on deaf ears. And that is why the garden got its name, Little Sparta, because it was warring with Edinburgh. They are the Athens of the North, which I think is a fabulous nugget of information to know. Now, the garden itself can be found south of Edinburgh, and it's in a district of Scotland known as South Lanarkshire. I myself am from North Lanarkshire, so it's not very far from where I grew up. Little Sparta has been described as the greatest Scottish artwork of all time and one of the greatest contemporary pieces of art anywhere. And I would once again encourage you to look on their incredible website to see the scale of the garden, which is about 3.5 acres, and take the virtual tour if you're unable to physically visit. It does give you, as I've said previously, a great understanding of what is going on. And as mentioned, if you do find yourself in Scotland between the months of June and September, the garden is open each year, and it's open between these times to respect Finley's intentions that the garden should be experienced when the trees and plants, all integral to the artworks, are full of leaves. You have been listening to Jo's Art History Podcast Bite Size, small, manageable episodes which sees me, Jo McLaughlin, your resident host and art historian, deep dive into a specific artwork or artist in 10 minutes or less. If you have enjoyed this episode, please make sure to like, rate and subscribe, as it helps other listeners find us. If you want to support the podcast, why not leave us a review or tell someone you know who may enjoy listening all about it. If you would like to support the future of the podcast, please consider purchasing and gifting me a book from my Amazon wishlist included in the show notes below. If you would like to get in touch, please feel free to do so. It'd be lovely to hear from you. You can email me, joesarthistory@gmail.com, or you can find me via Instagram, which is @joesarthistory, or you can search for my name, Jo McLaughlin, and you'll find me that way too. Finally, I've been your host and your resident art historian, Jo McLaughlin, and thank you so much for listening. Keep learning, and remember, art is for all, even in bite-sized editions. See you next time. Bye.